All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I know people are just finding their seats, etc. But my name's Robert Jenkins, and I'm the Global Director of Education for UNICEF, and we'll be moderating this session. Thank you all again for making time. Let me just quickly introduce the panel, and then we'll immediately get started. We have Dr. Sonia Ben Jaffer, the CEO and Chairperson to Global Councils and Sustainable Development Goals, Abigail Foundation at the far left. We have Fatima, closest to me here, Fatima Hamed Kamel, the CEO of GEF Education Platform based in Bahrain, and Ashish Advani, the President and CEO of GA Worldwide. Thank you very much to our panelists for taking time to join this discussion. Thank you for all of you for choosing to also participate. Before we start, we do have a very brief video to set the context, so we'll run that now.
We can unlock children's dreams, drawing on proven policy solutions.
So thanks again for joining. I think we all recognize that currently we are collectively experiencing a global learning crisis, meaning children are not learning what they need to learn at the time that's needed in order to be, say, successful in life, transition to the workforce, realize their full potential. I'm hoping everyone outside this room also thinks that, but those of you who have come, I think, definitely recognize the challenge. So we're going to spend our few minutes together discussing solutions to that challenge, some examples, some models, some lessons. How can we transform education, particularly focused on marginalized children, children that within countries do not have the same opportunities as other children. And we're also going to zero in on interventions that are at scale, big programs. Why that is because we have a big challenge. Many children around the world needing support. So I'm also going to encourage us to engage and interact. So just as a heads up, it'll be great to hear your own thoughts and comments and questions. I know the panelists also would appreciate that. So to begin though, let me pass to Sonia, who I mentioned before, works for Al Gharaida Foundation, who's a longstanding partner of many of ours, and works in both the development and the humanitarian phases of this work, meaning both recognizing this is a crisis that requires humanitarian urgent response, but the foundation also works on medium longer term development. So maybe zeroing in on that, Sonia. Sure. What lessons have you taken or would you share that you think are of interest to this discussion?
Thanks, Rob. As you mentioned, we are a foundation that has worked with UNICEF for multiple years, and we've done multiple year grants with you. I looked at the numbers earlier, and together we have supported 30,000 young learners. And we are a private foundation, and we're privately funded. What's interesting about what you were talking about is over the years, we have really had to work a lot closer with the humanitarian emergency response sectors, even though we work on development. We're a strategic philanthropy, which means that rather than being a charity that just gives money and just says, okay, go fix it, or throws money at a problem, what we do is we strategize with stakeholders, and we look at how we can try and solve and resolve root problems in a sustainable manner. So that means different kinds of financing models, different kinds of program development. And we found that UNICEF has been one of those partners that's willing to sit and think with us. And I think that that's why we've had some success in this.
Really appreciate that. And the Al Ghudayda Foundation truly it's been a thought partner with ours, and also an implementation partner, something we've all greatly appreciated. All right, so if we're going to just, and again, we're going to open up and engage with others, but if we can turn now to Fatima. Fatima, the GFH, education platform is also very much engaged in reaching children, enabling them to learn at different stages, including the importance of both foundational learning, but also at higher levels. Do you want to speak a little bit to that transition?
Yes. So if I'm going to talk about the GFH education platform, which was established around 5 years ago with key focus on, we would say, early education or the K-12. Definitely after the COVID, there was a lot of intervention required to be able to address the knowledge loss that occurred during the COVID period. And I think this is also was aligned with our infancy stage when the platform started. So we've launched the platform in 2019, and the COVID hit the market in 2020. So just by contextualizing the magnitude of the issue based on the results that we've gained from assessing our students during and post-COVID, we were able to provide several intervention, I would say, solution. Not all of them provided the same outcome. Some work better. Some, to be honest, was just tried for a while and then was not continued with. But still, one of the key challenges that we are facing is the ability to bridge the knowledge loss and to realign the students to be back to a complete class setup with discipline, with ability to have the right, I would say, social and emotional skills, the ability to have a self-control, and all of these matter. Looking at, I would say, postgraduate or after finishing the high school, I would say that we've already lost some year group where we didn't able to provide them with the right support since they've graduated immediately post-COVID. But with the other, we are still working with them and with the policymaker to provide them with the right timely intervention.
I really appreciate that. A lot of, both panelists so far have put a lot of issues on the table, great lessons, appreciate it. Can I now pass to you, Ashish, and as the CEO of JA Worldwide, I think we've all recognized, because of just the scale of this challenge, just sheer numbers of children around the world that need transformed education, but also in order to transform education, we'll need the public sector, we'll need the private sector, we'll need community-based organizations, parents. I think you can add to this discussion specifically on the importance of this kind of dynamic set of partners, including the private sector. Can you share some thoughts on that?
Sure, thank you for this opportunity. You can hear me, right? Just want to check. Thank you. So working with the private sector in education is something that JA has been doing for decades. And it changes based on the interests of the private sector partners that we work with. We currently work with over 70% of the Fortune 200, and I will say that every partner is somewhat different in what they want to experience in their partnership with us and with education. So many of you work in the private sector. If you can imagine going to a school, just to give you one very specific example, and connecting with a young person who learns about your career, like almost like a career day. So that transforms what that young person might think and experience for what they can realize for their own life, because they see you, they meet you, they realize potentially I can be like that person. That's just one example to make it very concrete. But what we've learned is now with technology, with what's happening even with AI, that our partnerships with the private sector want to change from just being a traditional career day model to actually allowing young people to interact with technology, to allowing young people to think about careers that we haven't even invented yet, so to get them to be much more innovative thinkers, design thinkers. And what you might be thinking of right now is a young person who's in a private school, maybe where you send your kids. But I will tell you from my own experience, the impact that we can have, not just in that setting, but in other types of school-based and non-school-based settings, is life-changing. To introduce a young person who's not in a traditional school setting, let's say in sub-Saharan Africa, to a person who has a career path, who came from the same refugee camp they came from, the same rural setting they came from, can fundamentally change their life because they see a role model they didn't know existed because they only know their parents and parents' friends. So just that little encouragement from somebody who's achieved some success from their background can not just change their trajectory, but change the community's trajectory as well.
I really appreciate your optimism. As you know, working in this job I'm in now is at the global level in education. It is so easy to get sort of overwhelmed by just the sheer challenge, level of learning loss, the moving, what it takes to move an education system. I really appreciate. Maybe this brings me back to you, Sonia, because Al Gharaira's foundation is known for innovation. It's known for new approaches that have made a difference. What gives you optimism, or what are some of those examples that you think this is a reason to be hopeful?
Well, I think that what makes a difference with the Al Gharaira family, there's two funds. There's the Refugee Education Fund and there's the foundation. It's father and son. And they both decided that education was a pathway to a better life for others. And I think that most people would agree with that. What's different is the way that they infuse the business, private, corporate strategies in our operational strategy. And so we have the KPIs, the board meetings, the accountability that I think has sometimes been missing from development sectors. And what we have found is when we're working with our stakeholders, we have invited the stakeholders to the table to co-construct solutions. And so we have, partners like Discovery Education, which is it's part of a conglomerate that is publicly traded in the US, and they are on board with working with us in Lebanon during a pandemic with War Child Holland. And on top of that, we had more support from Mashreq Bank, which is a bank in Dubai. So you have all these people that came together and said, okay, there's a crisis, how do we help with actual actions so that we can actually pull people out of what could have been a very serious learning loss. And because of that group, we didn't lose all 17,000, that group and other partners, but all 17,000 of our young people under our programming. And we were able to increase it. And UNICEF was actually a part of the increase because it was so successful. And the success comes from the fact that it wasn't just one education parameter, but it was looking at electricity, it was looking at power banks, it was looking at broadband, it was looking at so many different pieces, and that's kind of the corporate model of how do we engage. And so having that mindset infused is very helpful to us.
I really appreciate that. And I think that is a challenge, but also back to many of what's been said, a fact in education is it's not going to be one single intervention only. Totally. It's going to require this sort of, if you like, broader environment. And maybe that brings me to you, Fatima, as a follow-up question. Recognizing the management of the school itself is a key component, and your model has been so successful. What do you think is critical at the school level to achieve that success?
Okay, طبعا, I think as you've mentioned, we cannot have one model that it's fit for all. Intervention varies between different age groups. Some age group required more intervention, some required less. I would say also some subjects required like more support, like I think globally was reading and math, which the students suffered mostly after the pandemic. But what really worked well is that, as Dr. Asoni was mentioning, it's aligning the key stakeholder, being the policymaker, being the educator, and the parents. Among also different year group, I would say to some extent, the parents acknowledge that there is a learning loss, but they would not acknowledge that their kids are suffering from that learning loss. So they sometimes would not be happy to the school to provide some required timely intervention, and to us this was a challenge. Another thing which I think for our school was really worked very well, that since we've started aggregating these assets and having the schools on board, we've had our standardized test model, which so we don't rely only on internal data, but we have like map tests and other things. And this has really supported us by having an independent assessment on where the students were standing during pandemic and how they are really now progressing to recover after pandemic. The last thing was also the other KPIs that really was very detailed, was timely collected, طبعاً with the supporting of the educator on ground and the parents. Otherwise, we would not be able to achieve what we've achieved so far.
I really, really appreciate those points. Thank you. So I'm going to open up to the audience. Just before we do, though, Ashish, I'm going to ask a final question to you, but just heads up, be ready. We're going to pass the mic around and look forward to your engagement. So I think you've heard a lot of points on so far on what does success look like? What is this transformation? We've talked about we need social emotional well-being. We need obviously learning outcomes. We need engagement. We need children to feel empowered and engaged. And maybe that's where I come to you, Ashish. Thinking of youth, knowing your background as a social entrepreneur, knowing how much you value new ideas and engaging youth, and can you talk a little bit about, we all recognize the importance of reading and writing and math and early, but as children get older, they want to engage. What does that look like to you? What lessons do you want to share from that perspective?
Sure, and I'll try to make it personal for all of you, partly because I want you to look up from your phones and get ready to ask some questions. So, when you think about how to actually impact a young person's mindset, right? How do you actually get a person to say, go from I can't to I can? To actually do that, there's some good science. So some very practical good science that we can rely on to get young people to change their mindset. One is to have role models that come from the same background they do. I said that earlier. That's part of the kind of mindset shift. The second is optimism. How do you actually learn to be optimistic? How can you turn negative thoughts and make them positive? It's actually part of the Vision 2030 plan to actually build optimism and positive thinking into the mindset of young kids here, which I think is wonderful and explicit that that's a stated goal. Because there's actually ways you can do that by learning how to show gratitude. Showing the habit of gratitude builds an optimistic mindset. A third is having young people hear from others that they will succeed. Ideally, not just their parents or their teachers, but other people, a mentor or a supporter, saying, yes, you will be successful. And that's probably the one we haven't talked about yet, which I think has so much potential because it costs nothing. Costs the education department nothing, costs government nothing, takes very little time, but takes the concerted effort for every young person in the world to have somebody who believes in them who's not their parents. And we've seen very up close and personal at JA. Our brand, by the way, here is Injaz, for those of you who may know, Injaz Al Arab and Injaz Saudi here. When you connect a young person to somebody who's not their parents and not their teacher, who says, I believe that you're going to be successful, and I believe you might be successful doing this because I see this in you, it fundamentally changes the direction of that person's life and their mindset. So costs nothing. We can do it at scale. JA already does it at scale, 15 million young people a year and counting. I'd encourage you, as you think about questions to ask, think about how you can be part of the solution.
Fabulous. Thanks for sharing that. Really greatly appreciate it. And thanks also to all three panelists for being so practical and tangible on what can be done. I really appreciate that. Not unexpected because you're all doing, so much appreciated. All right, let's open up and along the lines of the title of the session, but also what you've heard, I'd appreciate anyone who would like to, yes, please. And maybe if you don't mind, just introduce yourself so that we know where you're coming from. And
thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
My name's Daniel Thornton. I work for Gavi, which funds immunization in lower income countries. So Gavi's an alliance, and UNICEF is a really key part of that alliance, as you know. So great to see you here today. Gavi has a focus on health, but health and education obviously have close links. A healthy child can learn, and a child who learns stays healthy too. But I wanted to focus in particular on one vaccine that we are working to roll out in the poorest countries in the world, which is the human papillomavirus vaccine, which prevents cervical cancer. And that vaccine is needed by adolescent girls to prevent cervical cancer. The burden of disease is highest in poorest countries, but the treatment options are very limited. So the vaccine's really important. You have to deliver it in schools, or at least it's a very good way to deliver it. So we're really dependent on cooperation with the global education sector and with national education systems to get this vaccine to girls, and also to see the education that girls need to, protect their health. So I just wanted to hear the panel's reflections on global health and global education as partners, and how we can learn from each other and work better to achieve universal human capital.
I really appreciate that question. I think it's critical. Coming from the education sector, we're fixated on learning, as we should be. Kids need to learn, and we make passing reference to hungry kids can't learn, or kids that are sick can't learn, or kids that are worried in terms of their protection can't learn. But I do not think we're proactive enough in the sector to make those bridges and to crowd in the other sectors and engage. Let me see if there's a reaction to that. Yeah, please.
Can I make a suggestion? Well, and this is a very practical one for us because we're action-oriented as a foundation. One of the things that we engaged with, and with UNICEF and the Islamic Development Bank, is the Global Muslim Philanthropy Fund. Because as you, and probably everybody in the world by this point knows, there is quite a bit of generous wealth happening in this region. And to be able to galvanize Islamic funding to be able to help is something that we've been working very closely on. But what we did in this particular fund is say, okay, we, for example, will push for education, but we know full well that education alone doesn't work, nor does healthcare alone work, right? But we need rural development, we need. And so what the Global Muslim Philanthropy Fund has been doing, too quietly, in my opinion, is actually looking at how do we do exactly what you're saying. So if we find a poverty pocket and we all agree on where we're going to work for whatever reasons, we're going to say, all right, we have the health, we have the rural development, we have the education component, we have the human capital to work component, because education for education's sake is frankly just a privilege of the rich. We actually need them to have jobs and be able to become self-sufficient. And so those kinds of funds, those multi-sector funds that are working, I think are probably the future of what you're talking about. Because otherwise, it's honestly what I've seen the last 20 years working in the sector is, do I happen to know somebody in your organization that I trust, who I can tap the shoulder on and go, okay, hey boss, these guys are okay. Can we do this at a scale so that it's no longer just relying on that relational trust? And I think that that's what the Global Muslim Philanthropy Fund is about.
Ashish, you want to jump in?
I love that. I mean, that's exactly what I think is needed. Thank you for sharing that. I will say one promising development here is at this conference, according to the email they sent on day one, a summary, they said that there's an FII resolution to increase the ESG support for the developing world from 10% to 30% of the focus of, I guess, the FII members. And when I saw that, I thought, wow, now that is a concrete commitment, especially given what you do. And I think we should, one, remind the partners that they've made that commitment, and ideally hold them accountable, because I think that could be game-changing given some of the partners here.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of resources. I'm hoping when this conversation happens 10 years from now, the schools will be seen even more as a platform of multiple services, including health, immunization. But to pay for that, coming from the education sector, it won't be able to be paid for out of ministries of education's budget in general. There's, particularly in poor countries, there just isn't the money available after you pay teacher salaries to fund such a thing. So therefore, across sectors, across ministries, across others, it's back to a broad partnership, critical. But I think we all have to align on the role of the school can very well be a platform of a wide range of services. Critical. Other questions and comments? So as a good teacher, you just wait until someone... Oh yeah, please. Here's a mic here.
Thank you for your thoughts. So just a quick question. You're talking about the important role of...
You may just need the mic a little bit closer. We can hear you, it's on. But
all right, maybe it's better now. Yeah, just on the point of motivation and the importance of just having someone out of the circle of your family, your loved one, and really how... And I fully agree. I mean, I still remember that teacher who believed in me, or that person who just gave me that boost that really helped me have that confidence, in myself and what I'm aspiring to do. But how are you doing that? How are you reaching these various? How do you identify them in the student life that you're trying to impact, or that young person's life? Is it just the education community? Who are the various stakeholders? And the other thing you brought up, AI and technology. I mean, you can't be everywhere physically. How are you utilizing AI and technology to bring that kind of role model kind of role and aspect in the work that you're doing?
Great. So Ashish, we'll hear from you on the question on the how. We'll just unpack it a little more on the how. And then I think I'll open up to the panel on technology to address some of these issues. If we can, let's take a second or two on the second question, not only AI, but technology in general. Is it the panacea? Is it not? Let's hear from the panelists on that. But first, Ashish, on how.
Great, so let me give you one practical example, then broaden it. So one practical example is we have a partnership with a for-profit company called Goodwall. I'm not sure if you've heard of goodwall.io, but it's a scalable platform. It's like the LinkedIn for the global south. So we as a nonprofit partner with this for-profit startup, and this allows young people at scale to get recognition daily. I mean, it's actually award-winning on steroids. It's like you enter these contests, you get positive recognition, you sort of get almost like gamified approaches to sharing your entrepreneurial ideas. You get rewarded for doing it. You get like somebody saying, oh, you did a great job, and you keep going. Because kids like games, and that's a very practical technology example. But to really answer your question about scale, we have signed partnerships with ministries of education in 80 countries. We have a partnership with UNICEF in several countries, and we get role models, largely from the corporate sector, but sometimes from the entrepreneurial sector, and we bring them into schools, either for a career day or for job shadow days or for programs that we develop, innovation camps. They get young people connected to these role models, and then they get the positive feedback because they get somebody who they see a career they didn't know existed. And now we're even using like crazy technologies like TikTok, where young people are. You got to go where young people are, and rather than using it for entertainment, we show them a career they didn't know existed on TikTok in a split-second video. So it gets them thinking, oh, I didn't know that existed. So there's all these different ways to do it. I think you can do it at scale. It's very doable.
I really appreciate it. I'm going to come to Fatima. I also want to just thank the panelists for being concise, practical. I was very worried in this, trying to cut people off. I just really appreciate it. But yeah, Fatima, over to you.
So to go back to the questions is that I'm sure that your story is repetitive here to so many other people. We all had people who believed in us and supported us. But this would take me to the point that Ashish mentioned about the importance of mentorship. So mentorship is something I'm sure not every school, every organization is really focusing on. This is something definitely needs to be built in within the community at school level. This would speed up the ability to identify the right people, the right support. On the part of the technology, no doubt technology have a very critical, I would say, role in bridging a gap and spreading education among nations, which education is not accessible, education is not even affordable. But the question is can they also afford this technology? Can the governments, can the organization globally invest into the technology to make it reachable to those low-income nations? And the last point to address with the technology issue, while usually what I could see that things that are easy to be taught, they can be easily digitized. But what about other skills, like emotional, social skills, cognitive ability? So the alignment between the technological aspects and I would say the other life skills, which are very important, and without which I would say we would be producing to the market a half-cooked or semi-completed product. It's the kids or this generation would not be ready, well-equipped to move to their next level at workforce.
Really appreciate those points, and the emphasis continue on social emotional health, mental health, critical. It would be fascinating to hear more if we had a whole other session on is rolling out technology as a learning tool within schools and outside of schools, is it the great equalizer or another potential platform in which we'll separate children and leave some children behind? I think it's a fascinating topic. I think it's critical for at least to be aware that that's a very real challenge that we have to recognize, but also recognize the transformative potential. Can I pass to you, Sonia, thoughts on this?
Sure. We've been working with technology and edtech for a long time. We introduced the online learning scholarship program back in 2016 with Arizona State University. We have 550 scholars in regions where we simply wouldn't expect to have that high level education, and we're all about like high quality to kind of bridge that. We have OLSP scholars who graduated from ASU in Gaza, and they got that opportunity because of online learning. Otherwise, they wouldn't. But I'll agree with you in terms of the context as well. You know, just because you provide online learning, it doesn't mean online learning is accessible. I think that there is an entire context around making sure that it works. And so in all of the programs that we've done around this, it has been making sure that the human capital around online learning is also being bolstered along with the infrastructure. And to be perfectly frank, we have found that infrastructure is a lot easier to fix than the human capital issue. That is a much bigger problem because it's not just about I'm going to give you this skill set, I'm going to give you the certificate. It's about I need you to understand that what you're learning today is simply not going to be relevant in 2 years from now. And if it's AI, it might be 1 month from now, right? So it's about a habit of mind that says I will continue to learn nonstop, I will need access nonstop, and I will need support nonstop. And if you don't have that habit, you are falling behind the second they hand you that certification. And so I think that has been something that we often don't talk about, and that is incredibly important. And again, our success has to do with the fact that we have a network of people who literally will call somebody up and say, I have seen that you haven't been online learning. I need you to get back on, because they don't have somebody in their family with the social capital to do that. And so those are the invisible parts of what the foundation and its partners do to get the success rates that we have. And I think that JA is very similar to that as well.
Amazing. Other comments, questions, thoughts, ideas? Anyone? All right. Shall we just now, as we have 5 minutes, we have 3 panelists. That's about a minute and a half each. Let me just, any final before I can ask yeah, please. Just before we pass, and then we'll be ready for our 1 minute closing each.
Thank you so much. It's a very interesting topic, and I'm sure we can go on and on for hours. Everyone acknowledges that there has been a global crisis on education, even pre-COVID, and now so it has been exasperated a lot. We have seen discussions from the private sector, from UNICEF, from foundations. But what I feel is the missing piece is the role of the policymakers, the government, how it can work with all of the key stakeholders to bridge the gap when it comes to the learning challenge. Thank you.
I think that's a nice bridge into one of the key elements amongst others in how we transform or how do we achieve universal human capital. So if we can keep that in mind as I pass for the summary comments, I don't know what order we want. We didn't discuss the order to wrap up. Does
Go ahead.
shall we go this way?
Yeah.
And then we'll wrap up on time. Please.
Okay, so just to address on this point, definitely as you mentioned, policymakers are aware that there is a loss, huge investments being made on training the human capital that are responsible to cater for these, I would say, need, whether being educators, teacher. But I think from what we could see, the key challenge rests with the executor level, not with the policymaker level. The quality of teacher, the scarcity of availability of a qualified teacher. For some reason, I think people who come from my generation would recall that the first job that they would opt to be was a teacher, but now majority of people even refrain from titling themselves that they are educators or teacher, unless some of them, they said it was the last resort and we didn't have any other job. So I would say that it's mainly lying at the execution level rather than the policymaker level.
Please.
So I'll start with complimenting our hosts here in Saudi, because from a policy-making standpoint, they have a very, very clear plan for human development. You know, the targets are very clear. There's alignment around the targets. It's obviously difficult to do, but I would say it's amazing how infrequently I see the clarity of plans with regards to human development. So let me start with that compliment on the policy-making side. And on the private sector side, you know, my call to action for everyone on the private sector is, you know, I guess stay committed to the commitment and the resolution that was made here yesterday, and partner with organizations like the ones you see on the stage to work together. And then for individuals, I would say, nice and simple, find somebody who's not your kid and tell them you believe in them.
Yes.
It could change your life. Nice
You
and
have to
simple.
know this child, or can you just...
Go to a random
Totally
child.
agree.
Ideally, believe it when you
Totally
say it. That helps too. But it's very easy, and I encourage you to do it. It'll make you feel good too.
I agree.
So
Sonia.
I completely agree that policymakers are incredibly important. And our model at the philanthropy is create and incubate in the UAE and then spread to the region. And we do that because the government has been very clear. We have our marching orders, and education is absolutely a priority. Human development for human capital for future of work. It's very, very clear. So getting people to galvanize around a single table around how do we make that happen, that happens to be easier when those policies and that vision, much like Saudi, is the same. However, I will say this. In the previous session, I don't know how many of you were here, but I heard one of the Accenture guys, because they were all men, say very, very clearly, well, we should just have our own AI academy and we shouldn't, deal with the others. And I've heard this from corporates before because they're tired of waiting for universities and everybody to catch up. And here's the thing, and Accenture is, by the way, one of our partners. But the thing is rather than saying, I'm going to isolate and just pick out the right people and then build up my own human capital, because you will lose them eventually, loyalty will fade. What is a better strategy is to say, I'm going to actually work with different stakeholders, governments, NGOs, with my corporate eye, knowing that that is not just my talent pool, but they're my future clients. And that is an incredibly powerful way of working on a long term if you want to get past Q4, Q1, Q2, and get into a future that is sustainable with your economic models.
Thank you very much for that, Sonia. So it leaves my final is to thank the panelists. Really, really appreciate how solution-oriented you were, how action-oriented you were. I think what we summarize is we have a global learning crisis. And I take the point that not everyone is recognizing that. Let's recognize the house is on fire. Children are not hitting the marks that they need to be reaching in learning outcomes. Also, the important second point, holistic approach to learning, psychosocial support, mental health, engagement, entrepreneurship, and innovation that needs to be within the school environment. So it's a new way of thinking of how children should learn and what does a school look like. I think the final takeaway is partnerships. And I think this panel represents that. It came up a number of times. Because of the scale, but also what we need to address this, we'll need an all hands on deck approach. Private sector, public sector, policymakers, principals, teachers, community-based organizations, technology firms, many people in this hall that didn't decide to come here. We have to go out and wrestle with them. So, and thanks to all of you for making time to hear us. Thanks again for the panelists.